We're continuing our study of the seminar of Jacques Lacan, Book 1, Freud's Papers on Technique, 1953 to 1954. This time we look at Chapter 7, the topic of the imaginary. Last time we introduced the three registers of the human personality. In this chapter, Lacan name drops the three registers, but doesn't explain them. Although we talked about these in the last session, let's go over them again. The three registers of the human subject are the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. Let me give you a real-life example to illustrate the difference between these three registers. So I look around my workspace and I see various items. The main piece of furniture here on my desk is my laptop, which rests on my desk, but to the sides of my laptop, also on the desk, are other objects: a wallet, a few pens, a chessboard, the pieces laid out in a middle game. There's also a copy of Spinoza's Ethics, and in front of me is a copy of Lacan's Seminar, Book 1. Outside my apartment door, I hear the sounds of construction, and there's a phone somewhere outside blaring some ballad pop. All of these things, Lacan would say, constitute my imaginary. This is the space of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches. This is the world the ego experiences. All of this stuff in my imaginary has its implicit meanings and functions. My books are for reading, for example. My pens are for writing. My chessboard is set up to analyze a game, and so on. But beyond this register of the imaginary is the register of the symbolic. This is the level of everyday rules and language. Beyond the ordinary meanings and functions of the stuff in my workspace is the larger significance of the workspace itself. These books for reading, pens for writing, and chessboard for analyzing have larger purposes in projects related to my life. Many of these projects I have chosen, but being a social creature, none of these purposes is wholly devoid of cultural influence. I wouldn't have an interest in philosophy and psychology if I hadn't been acquainted with these things early on in high school and freshman year of university, for example. And I wouldn't be interested in chess, probably, if my uncle weren't an avid player. So this register of the symbolic is not only the space of rules and language, but how these rules and these particular languages, or use of language, connect up with the larger social world with its authority figures and authoritative systems that go beyond my own immediate interest. Finally, we have the register of the real. Lacan sometimes uses this term, the real, in two different senses. In one sense, the real is just this complex of imaginary symbolic stuff that I deal with every day. More often than not, by real, Lacan means something else, however. As we've already said, for Lacan, this more significant sense of the real is that which resists symbolization. It's that ineffable stuff in those ineffable attachments which we all have and have not given, often maybe even couldn't give voice to. We'll have more occasion to return to these three different registers in the future, but I only wanted to mention them right now to provide some context for what Lacan is talking about in this chapter. Also, to explain this chapter, we'll need to explain another aspect of Lacanian theory, and that is by explaining what he means when he talks about the mirror stage. Although he doesn't fully explain it in this chapter, the topic of the imaginary, he does name drop it. The mirror stage for Lacan is the moment in our development when we can recognize ourselves in the mirror and see ourselves as some other, in a way that defies our normal egoistical first-person position. Lacan thinks this happens early on in childhood, and it's significant for how it shapes us psychologically. Lacan says that this moment of development, the mirror stage, shows to the individual, quote, the whole form of the human body, and gives the subject an imaginary mastery over his body, one which is premature in relation to a real mastery. The subject anticipates on the achievement of psychological mastery, and this anticipation will leave its mark on every subsequent exercise of effective motor mastery, end quote. And he says that actually on page 79. During the mirror stage, the subject sees him or herself in the mirror and thinks himself or herself the master over that body or whole form that it sees. Not only is this a moment of recognition, it's also a moment of misrecognition, a way of misunderstanding oneself. This is, for Lacan, the moment of the birth of the ego. Since this chapter is extremely dense, let's spend another session on it next time. But for the moment, let's stop there. Thank you for listening.